To begin with, what can be termed as Bengali food culture? Is it an assimilation of different food culture, or it has its own distinguished nature?
See, I don't think that there's any food culture in the world which does not borrow elements from the neighboring food cultures, also from distant countries if there's cultural connection between them. There are various ways of connecting. Trade in the pre-modern period particularly was a major way of linking different cultures and so on. And that's how various elements were borrowed, including food. And therefore to say that that it didn't assimilate other food from other food cultures would be wrong. But that doesn't mean that the Bengalis do not have a food culture of their own. Whatever you assimilate, then you work on it, you internalize, and you rework it to fit your own taste and palate. So there is indeed a very distinct food culture of the Bengalis, even though there are all kinds of assimilations which have been happening over the centuries.
Okay. It has been argued that Bengal had a rich gastronomic past, and fish and rice have become the emblem of Bengali identity. So why, instead of other delicious items, fish and rice were widely accepted by the Bengalis?
See, one of the food depends on the soil, the climate, the overall environment in which a culture is located, the people are located. Now, Bengal is a coastal area. It's mostly plain land within the monsoon zone, very fertile, and for a very long time it has been a place for growing wet rice cultivation. Growing wet rice, that is to say true wet rice cultivation. Therefore, it's natural that rice would be the staple of the Bengalis, right? Bengal hardly produces wheat. And as a result, Bengalis are somewhat averse to eating wheat and wheat products. For example, the handmade bread, chapati, what the Bengalis call roti, hatigora roti, which is the staple of its western neighbor Bihar. Right? There has been an aversion to that among the Bengalis, and almost say condescension towards, right? Therefore, anything which is dry, such as roti or chatu, right, as staple, is not accepted by the Bengalis. So rice has always meaning as far back as one can imagine, it has been so. Actually, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in an article once wrote that as the Aryans, quote unquote Aryans, moved towards the east, when it finally reached Bengal, it got used to the staple which is rice. What is rice? Oshar o tejo hanika, insubstantial and which kills your prowess, right? Which suppresses your prowess. And therefore, the decline of the Aryans practically began in Bengal, and rice is the culprit. However, Bengal produced rice, and it's one of the rice bowls of India. And in Bengal, as a matter of fact, produced such a wide variety of rice that it boggles your mind. When I was doing a bit of a fieldwork a few years ago, looking for Bengali sweets, I was told that most of the strains of Bengali rice have now been destroyed for one reason or another. Drought and consequent famine is one, where people had to eat up what they call beej dhan or beechan, the one that they kept as seeds. The other is these new varieties of high-yielding rice, IR8 and so on, have become so popular that gradually the cultivators are forgetting how to cultivate rice and so on. Okay, so all of that is responsible for a certain kind of standardization of rice, but it's still rice nevertheless. I remember when I was a child, the first rationing system during my lifetime was imposed, and the Bengalis were asked to eat wheat-grown products such as roti for at least one of the two major meals of the Bengalis. And what a pain it was for the Bengalis. I still remember that. And therefore, there is not merely that it grows and therefore one gets used to it, but one possibly gets addicted to it also. There are 3 meals of rice. Some people say that rice is addictive, right? I mean, I personally can say that I'm extremely fond of rice, and I think that, whatever else that you give with rice, I'll be able to eat it. So it's partly the environment that produces it, and you get, over a period of time, you get used to it, and then you learn to do a whole lot of things, from khichdi, which is a preparation of various strains of dal and rice, then different varieties of pulao, then biryani, and so on, all made with rice. It's not as if that you cannot make variation with wheat products. For example, different kinds of breads, right? But the Bengalis were not used to it. I mean, I'll come to the bread question later. But so rice. And the other is, as a coastal region, once again, Bengalis would have naturally been used to fish, but the Bengalis don't eat sea fish, except ilish, hilsa, right, which comes to the river to spawn. All other sea fishes Bengalis by and large avoid. It's the sweetwater, mostly riverine and pond fish, right, that they usually eat. And there is no dearth of, for example, compared to Eastern Bengal, which is now Bangladesh, and Western Bengal, the Eastern Bengalis are more prone to eating fish because there's far greater percentage of water bodies, far greater number of rivers, far greater number of, water bodies of different varieties. So they produce more fish and they consume more fish. So fish and rice together would be the staple of the Bengalis, mache bhate Bangali. And I'm seeing in the present generation, the generation that's growing up now, greater, at least urban population, greater aversion to fish than it was among us or even earlier. But till very recently, fish was staple, and Bengalis, particularly outside of Bengal, would do anything to find some fish and rice.
Like every other cultural idioms, food practices also change and evolve with the course of time. So if we want to mark the time period when these major changes took places within the Bengali food practices, according to you, what will be the major period of change?
There are certain factors which are constant. For example, the first description that we have of Bengali food in Charjapad, right, which is rice and shak and ghee, small fish and milk. That is a standard food practice, and that remained for 1,000 years. There's no doubt about it. There has been new items have been added, new kinds of combinations and variations have been made, new spices have come in, tastes have changed over a period of time, but the major ingredients and also the forms in which they have been cooked, they remain more or less the same. Therefore, I do not think that there has been any major radical break. However, it's not as if that changes have not happened. The Bengalis, particularly the Hindu Bengalis, did not eat, for example, chicken or chicken eggs and so on. That practice obviously came with the coming of the Muslims. Before that, we don't have reference to the Hindus eating. And even in the Bengali literature of the medieval period, we have references to the Muslims eating Morogir Goch, for example, Nochar Malu in Marunshinga Gitika, and so on. Chicken egg, chicken legs, and so on and so forth. But but not the Hindus. But obviously now chicken is a favorite even among the Hindus. So over a period of time, this was introduced by the Muslims, and over a period of time was taken on by the Hindus. So that would be one kind of change, marker of change. The other marker of change is with the coming of the Europeans. See, the great varieties of foods that came from outside. Even vegetable items. Vegetables have been one of the most staple ingredients of Bengali food. Okay, but if you consider the varieties of vegetables that were imported from outside, particularly from New America, right into Bengal, through the Portuguese primarily, others but primarily Portuguese, is that it's really surprising, the number of food. And if you look at the menu of an average Bengali now, you would be surprised to see the number of vegetables which are absolutely a part of the Bengali food habits, and yet was not known even 300 years ago. They had come definitely 400 years ago at least, 400 years ago if not earlier, right, started coming. For example, potato. Can you imagine Bengali food without potato? And yet potato is an import. I remember the first time I read Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's novel Ichamati, which is set in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, where middle to the third quarter of the 19th century, where in a village there is this grocer who is an entrepreneur and he is growing. He started off very small, and then his business gradually grows because he shows enterprise and so on. And finally, he's got a sort of large enough, concern growing. And towards the end of the novel, he makes a statement that he has heard that there is a new item of food which has become quite a favorite among the inhabitants of Calcutta, called Gol Aloo. And he was thinking of bringing some Gol Aloo and keeping it in his shop so that people could use it. So, possibility of introduction of potato into a Bengali village, and not a very remote Bengali village either. This has been a major indigo plantation place. Okay, there is a major indigo kuti, Nil kuti there and so on. So there, for the first time, potato is being introduced in the third quarter of the 19th century, if at all. He's thinking of doing so. Therefore, new kinds of food items began to come, okay, from this period, and becomes assimilated into it. Now, your work shows that that these items were not taken very easily. Even some of these vegetables were not easily assimilated into the everyday food practice of the Bengalis, so that incentives had to be given. They had to advertise, they had to say that, if you do this and that and so on, what are the health advantages of it, and so on and so forth. I mean, you would know this better than I do. And so that's one. The other is the European food, particularly cakes, biscuits, bread, right? And there was resistance to them. It's also very interesting that although these are European food items, these were mostly made by the Muslim artisans. That must have been another reason of resistance for the Indo-Bengalis and so on. But by and large, there was suspicion of it. One doesn't know what ingredients go into it, because what you find is a finished item and one doesn't know, etc. So, and still over a period of time, first the more westernized families begin to accept it, and then it becomes gradually pretty commonplace. Why is it so? Because this is dry, easy to carry, easy to handle, and so on. So therefore, it has certain advantages, conveniences, and that make people adapt to them over a period of time. So there have been, and now of course, all kinds of, now meaning over the last 30, 40 years, one can see a major change. Chinese food has become such a hit with the Bengalis, which is what, about 40, 50 years at the maximum and so on. And now variations on them, Thai food and etc. are also coming in. And that I will also say is a major change. Because now in the street corner foods, you will see that chow mein is a staple. You know, chow mein, if there's nothing else than chow mein. You know, over Maggie's, the Maggie chow mein, there was such a controversy. And when it had to be finally withdrawn from the market, it was a matter of anxiety for many mothers. And it has now been reintroduced, we are told. And so as a matter of fact, the world is becoming gradually globalized, right? Including third world countries like India and so on. And therefore, world food habits are being imported into Bengal much faster than it had happened over the last 1 millennium. But one can still see the major shifts: the coming of the Muslims, the coming of the Europeans, the 19th century, the real growth of the colonial period, and finally these new foodstuffs.
Okay. As we know, Bengal has different religious cult and sects, such as those of Manasa, Chandi, and Shakti, and they have different rituals. Even many of the 19th century and 20th century texts discussed about different aspects of these rituals. Do you think these rituals had any influence on Bengali food practice?
The rituals per se perhaps didn't have any influence on the Bengali food practice, but various worships recommended different food items to be given to the god and then accepted as prasad. And therefore, what are those food items? Those are sacred items, fruits particularly, right? And those fruits, particularly which were indigenous to Bengal, were usually the food which is given to them. Now, I don't know what's the English of it, outside of rituals, particularly domestic ritual, I don't know where shakalu is eaten. Right? And this is, to give you one example, and so on. This is a very, very indigenous fruit, which is usually offered to the katali kola. And so a particular variety of banana which is given to usually in domestic worship and so on. So that's one kind. The other is certain foods become associated with particular kinds of worship. On the day of the annual Saraswati Puja, for example, right? When food is served, it's usually khichdi. You know, that food stuff that I mentioned, mixture of rice and lentil. So that's that associated. At the same time, there is resistance to what kind of food may be given to the gods and what is not given. The food items which were imported from outside are still not fully accepted, right? And so on. I was told that tomato is still not given to the god or the goddess, right? It's not considered auspicious enough to be given to them. Outside of the culture, the degree to which a culture is willing to accept and internalize the food. Tomato is ubiquitous, almost like potato. Yet, it's not supposed to be given to it. So something which is sacred and has to be differentiated from the profane world, and therefore some food items which are kept away for the gods. At the same time, they have become so marked for these that they have otherwise lost their value in the market. Shakalu, who otherwise would eat it, who would relish it as a high-profile fruit, nobody would. And so this is the other. Of course, is the Bengal is a land of the Shaktas, of goddess worship, and a large majority of the goddesses are those to whom blood sacrifices are made, which means, of course, the sacred meat is then consumed by the devotees, right? And it's usually different varieties of goat meat, right? And that, for example, Kali, which is possibly the most popular goddess in Bengal in terms of daily worship. Right? Now, Kali is the inalienable item of worship of Kali is sacrifice of goats. Even other varieties, but when I went to Kamakha, for example, I saw hundreds of pigeons are also sacrificed. Here, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that in any. It's any temple, but it's goats mostly. So that is also a food item which is connected with. There are particular varieties of sweetmeats which are connected. Feni batasha, right? Where people do not eat it any longer. Mort, kodma, feni batasha, right? Sugar wafers, batasha and feni, nokul dana are all items of worship, of ritual, and so on. And therefore, these, and then of course these are eaten. So I would say that there are certain varieties of food which are associated. In certain cases, even fish is given to the goddess. So fish and meat. And there's another interesting thing. The goddess can be given fish. Brahmins all over in India are normally vegetarians, except the Kashmiri Brahmins, and the Bengali Brahmins, and the Gaur Saraswat Brahmins, coastal Brahmins in Maharashtra. Now, for example, Brihadarana Puran says that certain varieties of fish with scales on them, ash, with scales on them, such as rui, such as puti, right? These can be eaten even by the Brahmanas. And some varieties of fish can be given to the goddess. Okay, so there are clusters of food culture which are associated with various kinds of, for example, to give you another example, not all goddesses are meat eaters, right? Lakshmi isn't, Radha isn't. Now, I remember I went for a seminar which was held in the Mahishadal College. Right? It was 50th year of Mahishadal College. They got some money from UGC and they held a seminar. It was a good seminar, right? And they got scholars from all over, Bengali scholars from all over India, and it was a good seminar. In that seminar, and then after that, we went to visit the Rajbari. The king of Mahishadal actually established that and patronized that college. So we went and visited them, and they have the Radha Krishna idols, which are in daily worship there and so on. Now, during, I am forgetting which particular Vaishnava festival, Krishna goes for a visit to some other temple and stays there for a week. And then she comes back, leaving behind Radha. And Radha gets extremely angry and she fumes that she has been deserted by Krishna, who's left her behind, and then is having a good time somewhere else. In order to prove to Radha, to appease her, and to make her realize that Krishna isn't having all that good a time, the skins of the vegetables which are used for, which is offered to the god in worship in that temple, are brought to the original temple in Mahishadal Rajbari and shown to Radha that he is having these simple foods. So don't think that he is having a whale of a time. And in other words, therefore, this is food culture connected with divinity. Right? I was saying that the food culture that comes back from the gods and goddesses to humans, it's a human cultural form which is being presented to the gods and goddesses. Yeah.
The next question has two interlinked parts. One, from the 15th century onwards, the Vaishnava ideology was gradually spreading its influences in different parts of Bengal. The Vaishnava ideology presented to the Bengalis a new liberal kind of ideology. Did it transform Bengali eating practices? The two, in 19th century, at the time of Vaishnava revivalism in Bengal, a major debate was going on regarding Vaishnava, vegetarian and non-vegetarian diet. Do you find any relation between the two?
First the Vaishnava ideology, that's the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, 16th century onwards. And then 19th century,
Revivalism.
the revivalism. You see, the Bengalis are overwhelmingly non-vegetarian. The Muslims are. The non-Hindu Bengalis, let's say the tribal Bengalis are. The lower caste Bengalis are. And as I said just now, that even the Brahmanas are allowed to fish and meat, right? Sacrificial meat and fish, right? A particular variety of fish with scales. So the Bengalis, by and large, every section of the society would eat non-vegetarian food of different description. However, the Vaishnavas were mostly vegetarians, and this vegetarian culture obviously began to influence Bengali food system because they created certain varieties of food. Malshabhog, for example, once again connected with worship, as you have been saying, right, of Radha and Krishna. That is one. Different varieties of sweets, Malpua, is so closely connected with. You will be surprised to learn that when I went to Navadvip, which is the center of Vaishnava worship in Bengal, even today, which was the place of Sri Chaitanya and so on, and I expected that Malpua would be found everywhere. No, only on certain ritual occasions is Malpua given to the god, otherwise not. I would have thought that it's part of the daily practice. However, the association is very close. Okay, this is also partly in response to your previous question. Patterns of worship and this is actually follows from that. So there were Vaishnavas of different kinds. Those which were caste Hindus and accepted Vaishnavism as their personal religious faith. Ishtadevata, icons at home and so on. Most Bengalis, however, most Hindu Bengalis, however, worship both the goddess and an image of Vishnu and of Shiva and so on. They are quite Catholic in their attitude towards. I mean, this sectarian division isn't very particular. Vaishnava can participate in Shaiva and Shakta rituals and vice versa. And therefore, there was no problem with regard to that. Those Vaishnavas, on occasions, particularly on Vaishnava ritual occasions, may observe vegetarian diet. But by and large, they won't be vegetarians. But there's a particular community called the Jat Vaishnavas, right? And who are by caste Vaishnava. And they have their own insignia, their symbolic marks, the konti and so on, right? And they have their own set of rituals, marriage rituals and so on. They are by and large vegetarians. Okay, so I would say that and they are an offshoot of the Gaudiya Vaishnava movement. Therefore, I would say that it had an impact. May not be as pronounced an impact as one might have thought, because the influence of Gaudiya Vaishnavism was very strong, right? Particularly in Western Bengal, it was the major Hindu movement of the medieval period, and it spread very wide. And therefore, the kind of influence, and it is vegetarian, and therefore the kind of influence it might have had exercised on the food culture of the Bengalis, it did not to that extent. One of the reasons, you are used to a particular variety of food for a very long time, your environment produces it. Suddenly, if a new religious or cultural movement asks you to go against it, it's unlikely that you will be. Food habits are very fundamental, very innate to human nature. It doesn't go so easily. You're eating fish every day. Fish is available in plenty. You cannot discard it from your menu so easily, and so that's that. However, this the other part of the question, which is whether the Vaishnava revivalism of the 19th century and the major debate regarding vegetarian and non-vegetarian diet. See, I don't know to what extent this debate is connected with the revival of Vaishnavism in the 19th century. It seems to me that it perhaps has more to do with, or had more to do with, the coming of the Europeans and the European food culture. They were primarily meat eaters, and they were perceived as powerful, victorious people. And therefore, whatever they ate was supposed to be good for your health. And that was a very strong argument. Now, once again, this is something that you have written on, and you would know better than I would. But I've read you, and from that and from my own readings, I can tell you that the discussion actually didn't revolve around Vaishnava food practices and its possible influence on Bengali food culture. It's European food, right? Of which meat is a major component, principal component in certain cases, and whether it gives them the power to be able to conquer people, rule over them, and so on and so forth. And therefore a certain section of the intelligentsia, modern intelligentsia, who are a part of the process, the quote-unquote Bengal Renaissance, and so on, the product of that, they started saying that food should be eaten. At the same time, there was a group of conservative proponents of vegetarianism who were against meat eating, because meat eating was not seen now only as goat meat, right? There was beef, and those who were, the first set of reformers, the young Bengal, right, the Derosians and so on, they wanted to break all previous taboos, cultural taboos, including food taboos. They not merely ate beef, but the story goes, and some of them actually, Rajanan Boshu, if I am not wrong, actually wrote that they would scatter the bones across the area and say, and ask people aloud and say, see, we are eating beef, and so on. So they were actually making a cultural statement. They were making an assertion of breaking taboos and so on. So a large section of the Bengalis who were not willing to go so far were a little afraid. What is meat? What's meant by meat now? And so on. So that created a bit of a problem, and therefore different kinds of arguments were being given that meat eating isn't good for you, it generates heat in your body, and medical arguments were given, pseudo-medical arguments were given. I mean that famous debate between young Rabindranath and Chandranath Boshu. Chandranath Boshu wrote an essay in favor of vegetarianism, and young Tagore, 22 years old, wrote a rather impertinent piece against an intellectual who was much older to him in age, saying that no, meat eating is actually beneficial, quite apart from the fact that it tastes good, it's beneficial to the body and so on. And then Vivekananda, who very strongly said, Vivekananda said that the physical culture is as important in attaining salvation and being close to God as any other, and for that meat eating is good to you, etc. So it's not as if that the revival of Vaishnavism had any strong contribution of it into it. There was this great and interesting debate on whether one should be a vegetarian or whether one should eat non-vegetarian food. Within that, meat, what kind of meat and so on, right? But I doubt whether it is the revival of Neo-Vaishnavism in 19th century or the influence of the colonial condition.
So, coming to the gender question, it has been argued that from the beginning, Bengal has more vegetarian dishes than non-vegetarian items because of the existence of large number of widows within the Bengali households. Do you agree with this argument? It will be fascinating if you enlighten us about the role of women behind the formation of Bengal eating culture.
You see, the women are the ones who usually cook at homes. Has been doing so all over the world in almost all cultures. Therefore, if there are innovations in cooking, it will be the contribution of women. There's no doubt about it, and the Bengalis are no exception. It's they who would experiment. Experiment because they have a variety of things to choose from. Experiment because they do not have enough, and somehow they will have to prepare a meal. So either way, they are experimenting, and new things are coming out of that. So the contribution of women in the food culture and the manner in which it has been shaped in Bengal over centuries, there's no doubt about it. Yes, a large number of widows. And it's not merely, see, the widows had to be vegetarians, absolutely strict vegetarians. And they couldn't even, they were not even culturally, not even allowed garlic and onions and so on and so forth. Therefore, even their spices were limited, right? And within those limited range of spices, they would have had to cook things which would be palatable to them. Because a large number of other attractive food items, all non-vegetarian foods, certain varieties of dal, certain varieties of vegetables were also not allowed to them. Pusha was not allowed to them, and so on. So, anything that was considered to generate heat in the body, and yes, lentil, and so on, and therefore would sort of inflame desire, physical desire in you, those supposedly, those were banned. Now, within this limited repertoire, they had to prepare food and make it palatable. That's one, and therefore only vegetables, and they could experiment with that, mixing and matching, and etc. That's one. And the other is many of them had more time at hand. They didn't have a husband to serve. In many cases, they didn't have children. So their time will primarily be divided between the room of worship, Thakurghar, and the kitchen. So they will have time. And also many of these widows actually ate one major meal a day. And that was late in the afternoon. And therefore they also had, starting from the morning well into the afternoon, they would be cooking different kinds of foods, etc. So our great Budhare Boshu has a long essay, which has actually now been brought out as a separate pamphlet, right, on the Bengali food habit. Within that, he emphasizes very strongly the contribution of the Bengali widows, right, and the vegetarian food. And that would be the reason. I think you asked me whether I agree. I entirely agree. Right? I mean, I've heard from my mother, for example, different kinds of combinations which nobody would think of, right? And they had the inventiveness, they had the time, and they had limitations. All three compelled them to experiment, innovate, create, and so on. Okay, I'll tell you later. But my mother tells me that there is a particular variety of food item in Bangladesh called kochur koura. He said that only she had seen Brahmin widows cooking them, and that's the last item. Maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that they're cooking it. This is with pituli gola, ground rice, and shola kochu, the front part of it is taken off, and they are not ground. They are actually smashed a little bit. And they are mixed in pituli and kalanji, a bit of salt and other spices, and very lightly fried, right? Not deep fried, very lightly fried. Now, just think of the Bengal also has this wealth of vegetables. Just think of the variety of shak. In Mongol Kabbo, the variety of spinach that have been mentioned, the different kinds are 15, 20, right? Similarly, kochu, cassava, the varieties of cassava and so on, and what you can do with them. I entirely agree.
No discussion regarding food can be fulfilled without discussing the drinking practices. Therefore, can you enlighten us about the traditional drinking practices of Bengal?
Once again, Bengal grows a lot of green coconut. I mean, apart from water, of course, I'm sure. So, green coconut, and coconut is a major component of food. Okay, from fish to even meat, and different varieties of vegetables are prepared with ground coconut. But the green coconut water must have been a very major drink of the Bengalis. But when one thinks of drinking, particularly now, one thinks of alcohol. Was alcohol available in, one doesn't know, but it obviously was. Because Karon, which is ritually purified alcohol, was an important item of tantric worship. And tantric worship was pretty common in Bengal. It was almost ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And therefore, to say that alcohol was not available cannot be correct. Right? It's available. And the tantrics obviously had to drink it. I'm forgetting whether it is Devi Puran or Kalika Puran, but in one of these Puranas, it said that it's sort of making a concession to Bhamachar, the left-handed tantras, which are the more extreme kind of tantras, and said in a Bhamachari ritual, alcohol should be given. But for Dakshinachar tantric practices, only coconut water, narikeel udak, right? Only coconut water will substitute for alcohol. It will be taken as if this is alcohol, right?
Okay.
And so on. So this is an attempt to purify by Brahmanism of the extreme edge, marginal edge of Tantra, and so on. Bhavadeva Bhatta, a major Smriti writer of medieval Bengal, in his book Prashchitta Prakaran, after having described varieties of alcohol, finally said that drinking alcohol is prohibited both for the Brahmins and for the lower castes. So there was obviously a problem with regard to that, and at least the upper caste Hindus were strongly told that you are not supposed to drink alcohol. Lower caste Hindus, particularly the lowest of the low, the domes for example, obviously drank alcohol and in large quantities. Alcohol, do you know from where we have references? From Charyapad onwards, right? In the Charyapad there is a reference to, with the bark of trees, you prepare the container in which the Shundini, the wife of the winemaker, right? He prepares containers from the bark of the trees and so on. So that's the earliest reference that I can think of to. And then of course Bhattavadeva, I say Puranic. Puranic would be the, but you see once again, Puran is not talking about food practice, Puran is talking about, once you asked, ritual practice. Okay? And then Dharma Mongol, absolutely full, with the lower castes, with the domes and so on. Kalu Dome. What does Kalu Dome say? This insubstantial mortal existence, I discarded it this moment and go to heaven if I can get meat and alcohol there. Madhya mangsha jodi pai, right? Ashar samsar chhele tobe swarge jai. So this is Dharma. And also she says, if I remember correctly, it's Charyapad which says that there used to be a sign on the door of the shuri, the winemaker. And this would be known to those who are addicted to drinking. And they would go to their houses and there would be this great commotion when they go in. After some time there's peace and quiet. They of course are drunk and therefore there's etc. Then Dharma Mongol has very long descriptions of the shuri and the shurini, both the winemaker and his wife, right? They earned a great deal. Gete Kodi. They have a lot of cowries cowrie shells, because they earn a great deal. This is in great demand. People come and drink alcohol. It finishes in an episode where those who had come for a drink and they were told that sorry, there's nothing available, but they won't accept it, of course. I mean, it's their time to drink Mozart, and they want it and say de boli tani, etc. So that's one kind. And the other is when you get drunk, what happens? Jaya boli shurini re kol dite chahe. I must say that from this literature, it may appear as if that it's only the low castes, the very lowest castes, were actually addicted to drinking alcohol. That's not true, right? I mean, that they might have been, as a group, more prone to drinking because there was no cultural taboo, no social taboo on their drinking alcohol. But obviously, other sections of the society also drank. Shankar Bandyopadhyay in his autobiography writes that in his childhood and youth he had seen that the men of Brahman Pada, the Brahmanical neighborhood, would go to these areas, would go to where the Dom Pada and so on, the neighborhood where the low castes live and where the alcohol and so on were easily available, and would drink and would behave like drunks and drunkards actually. So every section of the society, some members of every section of the society must also drink. Why was there a prohibition? One is alcohol is addictive, and therefore anything which is addictive people are suspicious of, and rightly so. Second, if you consume in quantities, then you are likely to lose control over your senses and behave in a manner which is not responsible. That is another. And third, long-term use of alcohol can be damaging to health. So for various reasons, there is a cultural reason. One, association with the low castes and the tribals. Right? It's part of their everyday existence, the tribals. Right? They prepare their own alcohol and they consume it and so on. Even the government of India, I think, allows some of the northeastern tribes to prepare they have the license to prepare their own drinks, alcoholic drinks and so on. So this was part of that. So this then culturally became a question of purity pollution. And in order to differentiate yourself, to maintain a distance from these people who were habitually alcohol drinkers, there was an artificial kind of taboo which was imposed upon them. But by and large, I think that there were, in all times, in all societies, people who will break out of these taboos and go and drink.